Welcome to 7 Investing Now, a show that teaches you how to take a long-term view on investing by better understanding what's happening in the market now.
Good afternoon, 7 investors, and welcome to the Wednesday edition, a breaking news edition of 7 Investing Now. My name, of course, is Daniel Brooks Kline. I'm being joined today by Simon Erickson. Our lead topic is going to be Uber. Then we're going to talk about President Biden issuing some new executive orders on TikTok and WeChat. Not entirely only covering those companies, but those are the headline companies. But Simon, as we move into the delivery discussion, I want to show you just how kind of messed up this whole delivery world is. Now, if I use Instacart, they not only charge me an annual fee, but they mark up the prices on what I'm buying, sometimes pretty significantly. I ordered today from Amazon. From Whole Foods using Amazon Prime, which does not, as far as I can tell, mark up the prices. I'm not 100% sure what everything costs at Amazon, but it doesn't feel more expensive. There is no disclaimer saying prices may be higher like there is. I ordered exactly 4 items, and that took me above $35. I live walking distance to Whole Foods, and they had to pick that order and deliver that order. That might be cost effective for Amazon, but I think that illustrates what we're going to talk about with sort of the efficiencies of this whole delivery model. Have you ever done something so ridiculously lazy?
Transportation is a complex one, Dan. I'm kind of looking forward to this discussion because it just shows you how complex this entire industry is.
We would love your questions and your comments, even your ridiculous orders. I think I pointed out that when I was in Key West, because we were doing shows, that I ordered one single coffee. And it cost me like $11 because there were added fees with that. But we're going to talk about what Uber looks like in the future. And Simon, why don't you start by talking about what is it that Uber wants to be?
Well, we all know Uber and Lyft, or at least a large majority of America does. 36% of Americans have used the Uber or the Lyft ride-sharing app. As of a couple of years ago, that was up from about 15% just a year prior to that. So this is what kind of has replaced taxis in a lot of densely packed urban locations. Dan, when you and I go to airports, it used to be you'd stand in line and you pick up your Hertz, or you'd call a taxi to get you to the hotel. Now you just book the app. And what Uber really wants to do, to answer your question, is just be that app. They just want to connect the riders with the drivers, play this network effect where if there's more riders, there's more drivers, and there's less of a time that you have to wait to get your car. They want to play that as well as they possibly can and then take between 20 and 30% take rate off the top of the billed fare. So that's, at the end of the day, what Uber wants to be. Of course, it's never quite that simple.
Yeah, let's get to the reality of what they are in a second. I will just say there's some fundamental problems with how both Uber and Lyft launched. So I've talked about this a lot. This is an analogy I've used before on the show. But taking a cab from the airport wasn't fun. You had to wait in a line. You had to tip the guy. You're never sure it's $1 or $2 exactly what you're supposed to tip. He didn't do anything. It's not like he was a guy like at a hotel who actually got you a cab. There's just a line of cabs. He's not even opening the door for you. But that being said, Uber now makes it so I can have it more convenient. As I'm leaving baggage claim or walking through the airport, I put in that I want an Uber. I tell it I want it to meet me on the ground floor or the second level or whatever it is, or some airports have designated pickup spots. The car shows up, I know what it's going to cost, and then I get there. Here's the problem in the business model. It is generally somewhere between 30 and 70% cheaper than a cab. That to me is untenable, it's unnecessary, and it's one of those cases where if it was 5% cheaper, I would have been like, well, waiting in a cab line's terrible. Like, this is really convenient. I'll pay basically the same price. So that's one of the problems facing Uber. But the other problem is just generally the nature of transportation. Simon, why don't you take us through some of that?
It is. I mean, like there was a niche that really needed Uber and Lyft, right? San Francisco's airport, you couldn't get a cab. It would take forever to get from point A to point B. And they said, okay, why don't we start developing out of conveniently, Dan, it's in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, right? A bunch of developers say, hey, the real opportunity for this is let's start creating the sharing economy. Let's start taking these underutilized assets like cars, which are typically parked for 96% of the day, and start using them, start turning them into money makers. And so that the idea made sense. I think that Uber really tried to jump too quickly into bypassing the real understanding of the industry itself, of the transportation industry. We'll talk about that here in a minute, I'm sure. But also the economics itself too. I mean, there's a reason that it was 50% cheaper because it wasn't really kind of considering a lot of those other costs that were associated with labor, with maintenance, things like that. They were just kind of pushing on the drivers and said, let us just focus on the app. I think that the really interesting thing, though, is that there are a lot of regulations, not only country to country, but even state to state. Department of Labor, Department of Transportation, these are state-based regulations. And Uber is now past that hyper growth mode where it's stepping on the accelerator full tilt, if you don't mind the pun. And now it's kind of saying, okay, there's some speed bumps we need to figure out. We're going to be spending a lot of time in court discussing those with a lot of the powers that be in the regulators.
And this isn't unique to Uber. Airbnb has gone through many of the same things. So basically, these companies share a sort of ethos. You aren't staying in your house, or you own a property that no one's in, you rent it out. You have a car and it's not making you money, it's not doing anything, you're not working at the moment, you use it, you get in it, you drive people around, they pay you money. That makes sense, but there's a lot of government going, hey, wait a minute, like we sell taxi medallions. Like, is this even legal? By the way, we regulate hotel rooms and there's all sorts of taxes and rules and other things associated with it. And that is a problem, not just on a state-by-state basis, sometimes in a city-by-city basis. And I'll give the example. Uber, I forget if they're back in Austin or they're still kicked out of Austin, but Uber was kicked out of Austin partially because they wouldn't do background checks, right? And that terrifies me a little bit. So I'm getting in a car. Like, you have to have a background check to work just about anywhere that's public facing. You can be driving a car with me in it with no background check. Like, you could have like 8 vehicular homicides or be a, who knows what level of criminal. That seems terrible to me. Why is this even a thought?
The interesting thing about that too, Dan, is that I would travel to South by Southwest every year, one of my favorite conferences in Austin, of course. And I still remember when Uber got kicked out and they said, hey, safety concern. Austin said, you got to do background checks on all your drivers. Uber said, no, we're going to do that. Austin said, you're out. And there was another Uber-like app. I believe it was called Fasten. I can't remember if that was correct or not, but there was another one that looked and felt just like Uber. It had the map, it had the matching and everything like that. And everyone in Austin at the conference said, oh yeah, use this. If you used Uber before, this is available for you. And it just kind of shows you that, with the cloud and with the infrastructure that is available now at a very low cost, you don't have to build the capacity for your own data centers anymore. You can spin up solutions on local bases like these, which still need to transport people from point A to point B. And if large companies aren't going to cooperate with the rules, then there are other solutions that are going to pop up in a short amount of time.
It was actually called FAIR. And I'll push back a little bit. Thank you, Sam Bailey, for sharing that answer with us. We'd love your questions and comments, of course, and we will get to them as we go. If they're not about Uber or transportation or driving, we'll probably answer them after the segment. But that being said, Simon, I don't think it's as easy to get to that critical mass, because I know in Las Vegas, there's an app that's very Uber-like where you could use it to pay your taxi fare. You could use it to get a taxi. And that sounds great, but am I really downloading an app just to use in Vegas when I could use Uber or Lyft? So I'm pretty sure those types of solutions are only going to work in markets that outlaw Uber and Lyft. But this is going to be a massive regulation headache. The other issue we're going to deal with, and let's talk about this a little bit right now, is they're going to have labor problems on a bunch of different levels. So first, we're seeing right now in Las Vegas, there's an overall shortage of workers and people who were not lifetime Uber drivers. And by that, I mean, many times I'm in an Uber in Vegas and it's a former cab driver who's just a driver. That's what they do for a living. If you were a blackjack dealer who was driving Uber and now you can get 50% more money to go back and be a blackjack dealer than what you made previously, which is what's happening, you're going to go be a blackjack dealer. So there's a labor shortage problem. And Simon, we could talk about how they're addressing that. And then 2, there is a regulatory problem. The whole gig worker economy, they are at the center of it. There was a law passed in California over much fighting that allows them to qualify their workers as sort of like not quite employees, not quite gig workers. But that's a battle they're going to face in every I'll call it left-leaning state without getting into the politics. It's probably not going to happen here in Florida, but certainly going to happen across New England and New York and other places. Simon, dig into whichever one. I just talked for way too long.
No, those are great points, Dan, especially in California. I believe it was a Proposition 20. Oh, goodness, which one was it? It was one of them that was kind of, how do you consider drivers? Are they employees? Are they independent contractors? I believe that's settled out that they were still allowed to be contractors, but it kind of remains in kind of that limbo regulatory-wise. The UK just last year had a really big ruling that said, hey, you've got to classify, if you're going to be Uber and you're going to work in the UK, you have to classify the drivers as workers, not full-time employees, but also not completely contractors. You're going to get holiday pay, and you're going to get a little bit of time off and certain benefits that are kind of between full-time employee an independent contractor. But this is a really big deal for Uber because the name of the game when they launched was just say, hey, get as many drivers on this as you possibly can, keep the costs related to this as low as possible. And regulations are catching up on those, and they're incredibly complex based on the country or the state that you're in. So there's going to be a lot of discussing this with the powers that be. And then on top of that too, I mean, the economics of this were really built when Uber was scaling as quickly as it was under the assumption that it wasn't going to have to pay for the upkeep of the vehicles. It wasn't going to have to pay full-time benefits for the drivers. I mean, things like this is why you see so much of a talk around autonomous vehicles and self-driving cars when we talk about Uber, because that completely removes the labor component, which is all the costs right now, is the paying of the drivers, the benefits, the safety concerns of background checks. You can remove all of that. But then autonomous, Dan, is really, really hard to do. And it's also going to be really, really expensive because unless you're going to develop that yourself, which is really challenging, you're going to be paying someone else a lot of a cut to use their autonomous platform.
And you're going to be paying them to not compete with you. So if Tesla really figures out autonomous driving and it becomes legal, why wouldn't they allow Tesla owners, and Teslas are expensive cars, to put their cars into a Uber-like fleet when they're not being used? I think that's actually a pie-in-the-sky solution. And I know everybody sees the pizza commercials where they're using a Neuro to automatically deliver two medium pizzas, which is not very efficient in an entire vehicle. And of course, the Noid is actively trying to thwart this. I think we're very much in the fantasy stage of this. And we had this little fascination with drones a couple years ago where there were some test drone deliveries. And we thought, oh, there'll be drones everywhere. There's not going to be drones for a decade. There's not going to be autonomous driving. I mean, there will be select use of drones.
I might disagree with you on that one, Dan, personally. Yeah.
There is not going to be drones flying around New York City on a regular basis. There will be drones in remote areas, in rural areas, dropping off supplies, but it is not going to be the vision you're seeing in pizza commercials right now anytime soon. Simon, feel free to push back, but I think the autonomous solution is a long way away.
Uber has been trying this internally first. They had an advanced driver technologies group that was basically going out and trying to develop self-driving cars. And they said, for this to fit just within Uber, we're not going to make this work economically. We have to open this up to other customers. And so they spun it off to a group called Aurora Technologies, which is kind of developing it also for trucking, for the trucking industry, commercial fleets and things like this. And then what Uber wants to do is actually partner with Aurora, where they've invested some money into it. Their CEO, Dana Kawashahi, has taken a board seat with Aurora. So they're going to kind of work with them in a partnership to do things like this. But the real question I think about Uber is we always think about this just in terms of ride sharing mobility. We think about this as you and I, we're playing with the app, we're jumping around New York City and that's, or places that are densely populated. More and more this business and the vision of its management team is not just to be transporting people, but to be delivering goods to people, pharmacy prescriptions, delivery for food, things that businesses want to ship to one another. This is kind of the bigger picture of what Uber wants to be when it grows up. And that's becoming more important in the economics of the business.
It's worth noting they make money on mobility. That's you and I hailing a ride. They don't make money on food delivery. And there's a lot of logistical issues. So let's say they're picking up your prescription at CVS. One, there's all sorts of HIPAA and privacy issues with somebody else picking up your prescription. Though there are ways around that. There's also, can my prescription ride in a vehicle with somebody else? Because if you're going to maximize efficiency, and do I want to get into an Uber that has somebody else's Chinese food in it? Which I'm just thinking that because I ordered sushi last night. It was actually DoorDash, not Uber. I think there's a lot of problems to that. That makes more sense with a controlled fleet where they could have cabinets and compartments and other methods of dealing with things. The other concern here on autonomy, and we're going to get to a whole bunch of questions we have for Simon here in a second. We also see some great questions and comments. We will address all of those towards the end of the segment. But Simon, regulation is going to be a big problem here. I could see some closed loop autonomy, like in Orlando, the airport to Disney World. They could even close a lane in the highway for autonomous vehicles. But that's going to be a city by city, state by state. And the tolerance for error is literally zero. Like if there's 52 accidents per 1,000 with human drivers, they're not going to say, hey, we only had 32 with robot drivers. It's going to have to be zero. Am I right on that one?
That is correct. It's interesting when you see the investor presentations from Uber. It dreams and has ambitions of becoming a super app, which is actually kind of a real term in this industry. It kind of refers to a lot of the apps that are out in China, right? You've got Alipay, which is used for everybody to pay for everything in China. You use your phone rather than paying in cash. And then you have WeChat, which is used for messaging and kind of communicating with your friends and even businesses and things like this. I mean, these apps have 1 billion users, Dan. They're huge. They're used and a third of those are using them every single day. These have just become so embedded with everybody within the population. And so when you see Uber talking about it, it wants to go after fast and frequent things like rides, like food, like pharmacy, like alcohol, like groceries. It wants to become the super app of North America. And globally, it already has about 100 million users that are actually paying for rides with its mobility app. Can it expand that in a controlled way that appeases the regulators and actually gets commercial businesses on board in a way like you just described? We saw that Uber just signed a deal with Marriott, where you can actually get points on your Marriott Bonvoy, your loyalty program, if you use Uber. We just saw them sign with Samsung, with Coca-Cola, and one other large organization that's escaping my mind right now. But kind of these large commercial partnerships that want to have food or things delivered to their business. Are you more comfortable with delivering things if you know the driver that's going to be there and they're a full-time employee of Uber and they're dedicated for your business? Yes, of course. That's very different than just hopping in the backseat of somebody that's driving around the city. Now, the question is that a different Uber than we've been expecting as investors? That's now a $100 billion market cap that was shooting the moon because they were bypassing all these regulations and rules. And how is that going to impact the economics of the business? Those are the questions I'm thinking about as an investor.
And Simon, their scale, that's global. Those are laughable
Correct.
rounding error numbers for, I'll just pick two, Apple and Facebook. It seems a lot more logical to me that Apple or Facebook go to Tesla or Ford or Volkswagen or whoever it is and said, hey, we offer all these services. Can we have a Ford autonomous driver ride hail button? Or do you want to offer something like this? It feels to me like Uber is not even in the conversation to be a super app. They're like a baby super app at this point.
Yeah, I mean, how many billions of iPhones are there out there, right? How many billions of Android devices are there? I mean, it's kind of the platform. The network effect is going to gravitate to. People don't want to have 17 apps they use on their phone every day. We probably are using like 2 or 3 or 4, right? But if you're one of those 2 or 3 or 4 that's being used all the time, you're taking a small cut of everything, then this works. And I think that Derek Khosrowshahi, his vision for Uber is to become one of those 3 or 4 apps that everybody in North America is using. He knows he can't get China. He's already conceded China to Didi Chuxing. And it's going to be really difficult to get anywhere in Asia, really. I think that Europe and the United States and maybe a little bit from the Middle East is kind of Uber's backyard, that they really need to scale this business quickly.
I have 6 different apps that I use for food or grocery delivery. I find that frustrating. What I find most frustrating is that Uber and Uber Eats are separate apps. There is no reason that just can't be a toggle in the same app. And I understand that having different apps shouldn't matter because it's not like I'm ordering food and getting a ride at the same time all that often. But to me, it's just kind of counter to this whole strategy. If I'm on Facebook, I can see my messenger messages. I guess I can't see Instagram, so it's not fully integrated. But we have a whole bunch of questions here that I want to go through before we get to your question. I see a lot of great questions in the queue, so please get them in. Simon, I'll tell you now, we are going to do the what we're watching and talk about TikTok and WeChat. We are going to skip the home stretch, so don't worry too much about time here. Question 1, is Uber slash ride sharing actually disrupting transportation and delivery? I have some thoughts here, but I'm going to guess Simon has maybe different ones than I do.
Yeah, I mean, like that's as a long-term investor, that's the right question to ask. Is did they just grow so quickly by breaking the rules and now that's coming back to haunt them? Or are they really disrupting transportation? Is ride sharing here to stay? Or was it just really kind of neat and a way to bypass the frustrations we had with waiting for taxis at the San Francisco airport? I think that it's going to, unless we're just going to pile everybody into Uber cars and just this is the new way of transporting everybody. I think that it's got to be more commercial. It's got to be more of a business logistics play. And that's why you've seen Uber Freight and you've seen Uber Delivery in addition to the mobility business. I think that that's going to become a more important kind of controlled growth than just kind of everybody's going to be using Uber all the time.
I'd argue that Uber and Lyft are each other's worst enemies. Do you see consolidation? Obviously, in food delivery, there has to be consolidation. The fact that West Palm Beach has 9 different food delivery options, some of them I don't even have on my phone, is absurd. But do you think these two companies have to become one in order to have pricing power?
I don't know about those two. They got a very different culture. I do think that we've seen Uber make some acquisitions. They bought Careem in the Middle East, beginning of 2020, first quarter of 2020, about $3 billion acquisition there. Postmates, right, for food delivery here in the United States. You see them kind of doing these bolt-on acquisitions for controlled growth. Uber and Lyft together would be kind of interesting because they've been at each other's throats for so many years, trying to promote their own service over the others, trying to win over the drivers, trying to talk about the culture being toxic at Uber and come work for Lyft instead. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if the two of those were to come together. I think it's more likely that Uber says, hey, I want somebody that's got 600,000 relationships with small businesses, and let's plug them into our much bigger app and see how that works out for us.
I've always been surprised at how slow Uber has moved for serving niches. And like right now, I can book an Uber for my mother. Like that's relatively recent technology where you could send an Uber to pick someone else up. I don't even know if it's in every iteration of the app, but there's some things like, why can't I send a vetted, background checked appropriate person to pick up my 17-year-old? Like now we've sent my son in an Uber a couple of times when my wife had a flat tire and couldn't get him to school, which is technically violating their rules. But it seems to me like there's so many iterations of what they could be doing that they don't appear to be doing it. And I like the management, but I do question the vision. Simon, let me go to question 2 here. If autonomous driving happens, doesn't that also make it easy for competitors or other people to get into this space? Touched on this a little bit earlier.
It's gonna have to be partnerships with this, Dan. And the Aurora example is a perfect one. If you say, okay, Uber knows it can't ignore self-driving, but it can't do it by itself either. And if it wants to go out and contract Google Waymo to do this, or have somebody in a Tesla with the Tesla network do that, it's going to be giving up a huge chunk of change because those platforms are going to charge a lot of money for the technology that they built out too. And so I think that there's 2 ways to look at this. Either do it yourself or you work with somebody else and you say, here's the swim lanes of what we want you to do. GM bought Cruise Automation 5 years ago for $1 billion. And people were saying that was ridiculously overpriced. The acquisition was at a premium. It was really just a handful of employees that knew what they were doing. And just recently, Dan, we saw that the valuation just for Cruise within GM is now north of $20 billion. It's been 20x in the value of that business in just 5 years to show you how quickly self-driving is in demand. It's still very difficult, but it's moving very quickly. There's a lot of interest in this. I think that the right play for Uber is to actually find a way to partner with like Aurora, with somebody who's got a platform that will work and let them worry about the tech stuff and let Uber focus on the apps and the relationships.
We're going to take your questions in a minute here. And I will point out that I am bullish on ride sharing. I use this product a lot. I use food delivery probably more than I should. And I think it's one of those scenarios where these products will exist. I'm not so convinced these companies will exist, or they'll at least exist in this fashion. I also think it's very possible that there is a go-to private play here because I don't know that these are actually giant high margin growth businesses, but that's just a guess. And I want to ask Simon a question that Simon asked me to ask him. And I know that sounds strange, but I wasn't necessarily going to do it, but I want to ask him the question because I think it's really relevant. They have 100 million paying riders across the world. How much bigger is that number in 3 years?
And I love this question because we've always kind of said like, oh, more people are going to use Uber. The metric of choice was kind of like the mobility side of this business. I think that's nominally higher, Dan. I mean, like I think we might see 15, 20% growth in terms of ridership on a yearly basis, year over year. But I don't think that that's going to be like the 40, 50 or higher than that percentages we've seen in the past. COVID happened this last year. We actually saw a decrease in billings from mobility, 36% decrease year over year mobility because people weren't going out and doing things, right? People weren't traveling, weren't going to the airports, weren't going around places. I mean, you stayed at home. And so Uber obviously hurt from that. The interesting flip side of that was the delivery side of the business saw 166% year over year billings growth, right? Everyone want to have stuff delivered to them. They want somebody else to do it for them. They don't want to go out and do it themselves. So like, this is kind of the back and forth with Uber. So I think we've got controlled growth in the mobility side of it, the ride sharing side of it we've gotten used to. I think you see a lot more growth in delivery and freight, and that's going to be more important what we talk about as investors.
I've got 2 last questions, and then we're going to get to user questions. So first, Is food delivery a viable business? I actually think they should not be delivering food. It is incredibly inefficient. It's also a really bad customer service thing. Chances are my driver is going to get me where I'm going. He's not necessarily bringing my soup with my pad thai, and that creates a lot of ill will for not a lot of money. Simon, you've worked in food delivery.
Oh, it's a mess. I delivered food through all of high school and listened to Led Zeppelin, and it was kind of a fun job for a high schooler, but it's hard to make any money on that, Dan. I mean, if you raise prices, you raise the fee for delivery, people just say, I'm just going to use somebody else that's already working with those restaurants, right? I mean, there are other options available. You got DoorDash, you got Uber Eats, you have 17 apps on your phone, you said, that you can choose from. I mean, things like this, it's capped on the fees you can charge. You've got a lot of employee/worker/contractor relationships you've got to manage. And at the end of the day, it's direct to consumer. And each one of those is challenging by itself. You put all three of those together, that's not a real lucrative business, I think, as an investor.
So let's forget the regulations, because I would actually argue that of all the companies being talked about in the is it an employee or is it a contractor, you can make a pretty strong argument that Uber drivers are contractors. You can be an Uber driver and a Lyft driver at the same time. You can work whatever hours you want. That is kind of the definition of being an independent contractor, whereas in many cases, you can't work for Instacart at the same time you work for DoorDash. So, you can work for both those companies, but not for overlapping hours. So let's forget the legality, which is going to be a giant problem. What about just the overall worker shortage we're experiencing in the US? We're seeing wages, I don't want to say skyrocket, but I'd say $15 minimums are the norm. And you're seeing higher than that in many markets, certainly tourist markets. And that's causing a shortage of Uber drivers. Could this derail the company? I don't know that I'm waiting 20 minutes for an Uber when I could just hop in a cab at the airport.
The take rates for the mobility side of it, I've got some numbers that are important for investors to consider on this. The take rate is the percentage of the total bill that Uber takes off the top line, not the profits, off the top line. So $100 of mobility fare, Uber takes an average of 21.5% for mobility. That's going up, Dan. Like you said, economics will tell you when there's a shortage of workers and you've got all these regulations for classification of how many benefits they should. I expect the percentage that riders that I'm going to start over. The profits that Uber is going to take out of every one of their rides is going to decrease. It's going to be a lower take rate than they have currently.
Yeah, they've had to pay more. That's a problem.
And the delivery take rates are 2/3 of that, about 14% today. And those are rising over time as they're starting to sign more partnerships. But again, these are not fantastic economics. I mean, when you think about that in terms of the overall competition, taking only a 20% take of the total top line, I don't really feel great about the economics of this business. And in addition to that, their cash cow right now has been mobility. You look at adjusted EBITDA, that's the only part of the business that is profitable right now. They're still investing heavily in sales and marketing for delivery and for Uber Freight, which are kind of the other sides of the business they're trying to figure out. But we've gotten used to, as investors with Uber, just saying, hey, don't worry about the economics. Hey, they don't need to show profits. Hey, it's okay that they have a $100 billion valuation. Uber's got $6 billion of cash on its balance sheet right now. It's got a lot of options of what it can do. It needs to focus, Dan. It needs to stop trying to do 27 things at the same time and really just be like, hey, as a business, let's really, really go after food delivery, alcohol delivery, and prescriptions, or whatever it wants to be. If it can focus a little bit more and get those margins up, I'd be a lot more comfortable as an investor. Otherwise, we're just going to see more and more money go down the drain as Uber tries to test these things out and then concede share to its rivals like it did in China.
And I'd like to see them really hone in on their technology. They've done some things with ride sharing. You're starting to see in some of the food delivery apps the option of, and I don't know if Uber Eats does this, I get confused on which app is which, but you can pay a little extra for them to come directly to you. You can pay a little less if you're willing to wait longer. I would love to see, when I'm in my Uber, the option, would you like it to be $5 cheaper? We can stop right now and pick someone else up, and you'll still be the next stop, but hey, you'll save a few dollars on your fare. I think there's a lot of technology they're not using that they should be using. I also think there's some holes in their system. If your Uber can't find where you're going, they basically have no method to appropriately charge you. And I had that happen. I was going to a rental car place that simply wasn't where it was supposed to be. And my driver eventually took me someplace pretty far away from it. And what I had to do was hand the person a $20 bill. There was no method for that. So I'd like to see, obviously, you don't want them to just be able to willy-nilly charge people, but there needs to be a little more control. I will say that Uber has tried hard to give meaningful benefits to its drivers. Things like being willing to loan them $50 in the morning so they could gas up and get a breakfast sandwich and then pay them back from their earnings that day. Negotiated discounts, all sorts of places. I actually saw Uber speak at a trade show, one of their executives, and they did seem to honestly care about this issue. And I do think that's going to help them in this battle of contractor versus employee. But I want to get to your questions. We are running out of time. Sam, I am going to go in order with the questions, and I'm going to let Simon weigh in on each of these. We'll take Max Lucas's first, because that will be the first one. With the increase in ride-sharing prices, are we just seeing a true picture of what prices should have been the whole time? Simon, prices are higher because there is a shortage of drivers and an increase in demand. Will this be long-term?
The question mark, tough to answer this one, because the question mark still is autonomous. Like if you are having something delivered to your home and you have a self-driving car that delivers it, the price should go down. The labor costs are out of that, right? It's just to pick it up and then drop it off and make sure that it's safe. Now, if that is true, then prices might go down and we might see a spike in adoption from this. We've seen from disruptive technologies, typically what happens is at first it's really, really hard. It's an R&D project. And then all of a sudden you get your costs and your economics under control. That's mass market affordable and then shoots through the roof. Right now, a lot of people don't like paying $5 or $10 just to have food delivered to their home. If that's $1 or $2, do you start using that? Maybe. So that could be the new normal. We'll see how that goes.
It's a very tough balance. So if I'm taking an Uber and it's a 5 or 6 minute wait instead of a 2-minute wait, that's not a big deal. If it's a 25-minute wait, I'm looking at other options. And I think about when I travel to Vegas and I could hop on the monorail or get in a cab or in some cases walk, that there really is an inflection point of like, okay, I'll pay a little more. I'll wait a couple more minutes and I'm going to walk away. That is a tough balance because it's going to be different in every person's head. We're going to take the comment from David Strauss next. Thank you for sharing that, Sam. I'm not an Uber driver and they have obvious problems. But if I was a cabbie, it would be horrible to have to buy a medallion for $1 million. For context, I live in the New York City area. So for people who don't know, you have to buy a medallion. And this is happens in cities where the goal was to control the amount of cars on the streets. I actually think Uber is going to face more regulation in cities that had that had taxi medallions. But I don't actually think that's that many cities because you're right. It's not to protect the value of the medallion. It's to protect what is going on in our streets. And do we need cars stopping everywhere? And sort of, in New York City, they want to drive you to public transportation. That's why cabs are expensive to run and expensive to take. Simon, do we have taxi medallions in Houston?
We do not, but those are expensive in New York City. We've seen the investors, the third-party investors that have funded those, write those down for years, right? And David, you know this because you live in New York City. I mean, those have been very unprofitable. Uber has completely disrupted that whole New York City space. I don't think it's actually improving things, to be honest. I think there's just more cars on the road. Certainly when I go to New York for conferences, I haven't seen a faster trip to the airport in an Uber than I did from public transit. But there's more money being split up in more ways. So maybe the pie is being divided in different ways now.
Your ability to get an Uber is certainly easier, but in New York City, it's not like we haven't had the issue of illegal livery cabs, which are supposed to be cars you book, not cars you hail, picking people up. So this is part of a bigger problem, but I actually think you can't stop disruption. The cities like Austin that have banned Uber, I don't think that's going to be what derails this company. We're going to take Sprenger 10's comment next. Hi, guys. What do you think the large marketing costs and losses will stop for Uber? I'm not sure they ever stop in a competitive space.
Never. Promotions, get $5 off your next ride, book 5 rides, get 1 free. I mean, this is kind of direct to consumer marketing through the app, right? People are opening, okay, I'll use Uber instead of Lyft this time because they're giving me a promotional deal. Same thing they do with the drivers on the other side of the equation. I don't see how that goes away. If you stop doing that and your largest competitor, Lyft, continues doing that, aren't you giving them share? Aren't you just giving that away? I don't think that goes away anytime soon.
We've got a couple more questions and comments here before we get to talking about the Biden administration and TikTok and WeChat, and we'll do that in as apolitical way as we possibly can. It is certainly not about the politics. Tristan Wakely has a couple of comments. We'll take the first one first and the second one second. They just bought Drizzly, the #1 alcohol delivery app. I can get alcohol delivery with Instacart. I am not so sure alcohol delivery is that big a market. It's convenient if you're like having a party and run out of gin, or you're staying in a city where you don't have a vehicle and you'd like to stock your hotel room up, I am not so sure it's all that difficult. Like, how much alcohol are you drinking that you can't just pick it up in the once a week where you're near a liquor store? I have a drink as often as most people, and I just don't see it. And I have used Instacart to deliver alcohol, but generally when I wanted things from a very special liquor store that sells the Keurig pods, that I have the Keurig drink machine, and I didn't want to drive 25 minutes out there. So I don't know, Simon. I'm not sure alcohol delivery is going to be a big thing, and it has a lot of legal problems too.
That too. Yeah. It's all kind of the strategy, right? They want to be the super app that's fast and frequent. They want you to be using this every single day. Might not be drinking alcohol or buying alcohol from Uber every single day, but maybe that's one of the stops that you use on the app, in addition to ride hailing, in addition to having pharmacy, grocery delivery. I mean, Uber's trying to create behaviors, and they know they can't just do it with one part of the market covered.
Sam, we're not going to show the next comment, and I'm just going to share the spirit of it. This one is from Tristan as well. He asks if Walmart should buy Uber, and I'll put out, should any of the big companies. I don't know that works. Like, maybe if one of the big social media companies owned Uber, I don't think regulators are going to let Facebook buy Uber. But if you tie them to one specific retail brand, I see that as a problem. But it doesn't seem, market cap makes it hard for anybody to buy them, but like, would it be crazy for Microsoft to buy, to buy Uber? Hey, Spotify just bought Uber. Like, that isn't financially possible, but it would actually tie in, I think, better than Walmart or another specific brand, because Walmart's not going to want to deliver CVS. I think that's an issue. Simon, your thoughts here?
It's too big. It's too all over the place for someone like Walmart to consider it. Uber is a transportation company. Walmart needs transportation for delivering things, but it doesn't want to. I don't think Walmart wants to be shipping people around New York City from the airports and all the mobility side of it. I think they'd rather build out their own fleet and kind of put some autonomy on that, perhaps in the future. We're going to see how that goes. This is a buy versus build decision. I think a lot of those companies, especially the retailers that have interactions with consumers directly, they're going to be more on the buy part of this. They're going to want to work with someone else and let them handle this cost that is just kind of part of their operations. Build is a much, much harder one. If you were to kind of start from scratch or go out and buy something like an Uber for $100 billion, you've got a lot of headaches in your future, and you're probably a glutton for punishment.
I'll point out also that there's very low-hanging fruit for Walmart in automating the grocery picking part of its business. There's about 130,000 people that do that. And as labor gets tight, I expect them to do that. That technology exists. It's easy. It's relatively inexpensive. That is much more simple than automating the delivery side of it. So you don't do the hard things first. You do the easy things first. And I think that's how it's going to go in business. We are not going to see humans doing most of the picking of orders for these. Now, I do think you're going to see some premium services where you really want, the right apple and your salmon to be the right cut. You might pay a premium for someone to go to a nicer grocery store or whatever it is. We're going to close out with a comment, close out this topic, not close out the show, with a comment from Mike Fee. We're going to take Mike's first comment, Sam. Thank you for that. DoorDash drivers in my area make significantly more per hour on average versus being an Uber or Lyft driver. Less stress, less risk too. Uber will either have to pay more or charge more for their services, both of which will be challenging. Yeah, it's a problem. Labor is here a commodity. Like, I don't think anyone's like, maybe there's a few people that have that bartender thing where they like chatting and they want to be in a service business and they don't want to be in an empty car. But for the most part, if I'm driving and delivering, I'm pretty agnostic on what I'm driving or delivering and just want money. Simon, your thoughts here?
Yeah, this was my favorite question to ask my Lyft driver. Every time that I'd always use Lyft, Dan. That was always the app that I chose because it was my go-to. And did conferences once every month for 4 years. So I kind of always like to chat with the driver and say, hey, did you ever consider Uber, or what made you choose Lyft? And 9 times out of 10, they said, hey, I've tried both of them. I liked driving for Lyft more. Why is that? Oh, it wasn't getting quite the same volume that Uber was. They always said that Uber was getting them more rides, but they were getting paid better and treated better with Lyft. I don't know if that's still the case, Dan. I haven't traveled quite as much this last year due to COVID, but it seemed like that was predominantly the personal anecdotes that I was hearing. And again, this is just a cost for both of those companies, right? Uber and Lyft, are going to want to maintain good relationships with their drivers. But at the end of the day, it's not like they want to just go out there and start raising the rates that they're paying for them. It's still a cost of the business that's necessary for them. They would probably replace a lot of their drivers if they could with self-driving cars, just to take out the human component of it, take out the benefits, take out the safety concerns, all of those things. So it's an interesting relationship. I think that the costs are going up, and Uber and Lyft are kind of competing for a limited pool of people that will run the business operations for both of them.
And I'll also point out that during the pandemic, and I was in an Uber maybe 5 or 6 times, like literally in the past 15 months, but Uber had rules for its drivers. And I would say 60% of the time I was in an Uber, the driver was violating those rules. Now, was I going to report the driver and then maybe the driver realizes who reported him and gives me a bad rating? I wasn't going to do that. But that is a negative of having a contractor workforce where you really can't enforce rules. If that was a Wendy's manager, I could have a district supervisor who pops in every now and then and says, oh, hey, wait a minute. You can't mix vanilla and chocolate Frosty. That's not allowed. Like, you can't serve Frosty as a dipping sauce. I don't know why I'm thinking Frosty, but I would really like a Frosticino right now. So I think there's a lot of problems with this. I guarantee you we will revisit this topic. I actually think transportation and automation and labor are going to be 3 of the driving stories of not even the next 10 years, the next 1 to 3 years. I think we're
unintended driving stories. I love it, Dan.
Pun not intended. Before we get to talking about TikTok and WeChat and what's going on legally, Simon, we just got close to locking in our picks for next month. So I'll give you a little peek behind the glass. Simon sent us a Google Doc, and we have to put our top 2 stock ideas. Why 2? Because I assume if 2 of us pick the same one, there has to be some sort of negotiation. So we're not picking the same stock. I don't know that that's ever happened. I've never not gotten my top pick. So, hey, it's happened twice. So we send those, and then Simon comes back. I think it's Friday. He comes back and he tells us, yep, we've locked in these picks. And then we sit down and write 1,500 to 3,500 word, very easy to digest. They have sections, they're templated, where you can get all the detail you want or just the overview on why we're picking that stock. Or maybe you only care about valuation, so you're going to skip to the valuation or the risk or the management or whatever it is. That's all there. Then on the 3rd Friday of every month, we do a video presentation with PowerPoint and lasers and pyrotechnic. No, there's none of that. There's just PowerPoint. Though it wouldn't shock me if Max pulled that off. And then we present to our fellow lead advisors, and that can be a 15-minute to a 45-minute presentation. We make that available to our members. And Simon, for people who are not members of 7 Investing, 1, what are you doing? But 2, you actually only have a few weeks less, a month, to lock in our current pricing. What's our current pricing? It is $17 a month or $170 a year. If you sign up before July 8th, you get that pricing forever. When we say forever, what does that mean? That means until the end of time, until the zombie takeover, until the murder hornets come, whatever it is. But Simon, if you do not sign up by then, how much is 7 Investing going to cost you?
Yeah, that's right, Dan. So a little bit of background on what's going on out there is we are increasing the rate for new memberships on July 7th, right? The price of 7 Investing membership will go up to $49 a month or $399 a year if you sign up on July 8th or later. But we also said, hey, we really support everybody who's supported us so far in getting this business off the ground and helping 7 Investing become as great as it is today. We have members in 88 different countries. We've got a top 20 rated podcast, one of the best investing shows out there. Thanks to you, Dan, doing such a fantastic job with this 3 times a week. And we said, hey, we want to make sure that we are in line, that our price point is in line with the value that we're bringing. We have a team of 7 advisors now, which is 3 more than we had when we launched last March. We've got PhDs on board. We've got people that are really looking at the innovative pockets of the market. And we said we really want to make sure we're aligned to that. And so we're increasing the price to $49 a month. But we're also with the important caveat that anybody who signs up by July 7th is grandfathered in at that $17 a rate for good. That price will never go up for as long as your membership remains active. So if you join and you want to check 7 Investing out and you say, hey, I want to see what these guys and ladies are all about, now's kind of the right time to do it because you have the option of locking in your rate at $17 for as long as you stay active.
you got to tell your friends. This is something where we ask the 7 investors to really go out there and say, this is a valuable service. If you're a member, you have a referral code. So put that referral code out there, tag us, tag at 7 Investing, and we will share it. We want as many people to be what we're not officially calling founding members, but that's how I think of them in my head. We want people to be on board because we believe in long-term investing. We believe in what we're doing. We want all of you to get rich slowly. And we know that sometimes that can be difficult when the market is volatile, but we promise we will be here every step of the way to help you with this. So please tell your friends, take it to social media, call everybody. And of course, we have a waiting list. We're going to have an $84 student membership. So any person who's still in school locks in the $84 a year rate for 4 years. I believe if they're actually in school longer than that, that we'll figure out some sort of way to keep honoring that rate. But right now, 4 years is just the easiest way to do it. So that is a waiting list at the moment. And yes, if you are a student, I believe we can convert you if you ask once we move over. And we're excited by so many young investors being part of this. I've talked to some young investors and they're not necessarily even putting money in the market in any meaningful amount, but they're learning and they're studying and they're so excited. And they always bring to me some penny stock I would never, ever recommend that anyone buy. And you get to sort of take them through like why things are, it's so much fun. I really like being around just hungry, smart, younger people. That's most of our team is hungry and smart and younger than me. So that is definitely part of it. If you would like to join, if you'd like to come along for the 7 Investing journey, that is, of course, 7investing.com/subscribe. We make all our URLs really easy. So 7investing.com/subscribe. Simon, let's pivot to what we're watching. I'm going to set the table a little bit here. We're not going to spend too much time on this. President Biden has revoked and replaced 2 President Trump executive orders that looked to ban TikTok and WeChat. And basically what's happening is there's going to be a commission. It's the Commerce Department is going to look at these apps and basically study whether they put American interests at risk. So this takes away the immediate fears of TikTok. I'll also point out that with Oracle buying TikTok, this is no longer a Chinese company, and they've already said their data is not going to be shared with China. So we don't necessarily have to focus too much on these companies. But Simon, I like the idea that this is being done on a measured governmental basis. And look, do I always agree with, say, the FCC? Absolutely not. But at least there's a procedure in place to deal with this. I actually think this is the right way to do it without being political. Your thoughts here?
Dan, you know how it is when you want to talk about politics, right? We'd love to help you out if you want to talk about politics. We'll help you find the door, which is right over there. I don't have a qualified opinion on the politics side of this. It just as the investor, my interest in this is that it's very challenging for tech companies sometimes to expand into different regions other than where they're personally domiciled, where the company is domiciled. We've talked about this a lot, whether it's Huawei, whether it's ByteDance, in the TikTok thing, whether it's South America. There's kind of regional monopolies that not only exist that way because of consumer buying habits, but also regulations and kind of things like this based on the administration. Presidency in the United States is a 4-year term. If you get reelected, you might be in there for 8 years. Businesses, when they're setting up shop in another country, are obviously want to think in much longer terms than 4 or 8 years. And so even the back and forth, even if it's positive or good for your business at the time, it could always change. And it's really hard. I mean, we've seen Netflix and Facebook and so many other companies try to get into China and fail. And then you see Chinese companies try to set up shop in the United States, and it's similar frustrations for them. So when we say tech companies globally scalable, the world is your oyster, international expansion, international revenue growth, it's a lot harder than I think that just the earnings releases and the takeaways from the conference calls sometimes suggest that it is.
I'll speak in a very base way about Chinese politics because I think it's relevant here. And back at the place I used to work, I did a show with an expert named Ben Ra, who's actually of Chinese descent and is a wonderful human being. And he sort of explained that in China, people don't view themselves as separate from government. And I don't want to specifically, paint any group, but there's not the privacy concerns we have here sort of endemic. I mean, you could see how the United States started. We were a country that's based on freedom and the government, not sticking its nose. So why is this relevant? It's relevant because we're going to have this Commerce Department group figure out if TikTok's information was shared with a Chinese company, which it's not going to be in the US, but let's pretend it was, because it used to be, well, is knowing that Simon likes people dancing to Despacito and watches that over and over again, is that relevant? Because it might help you hack his password or blackmail him somehow? Or is that not all that relevant, and we don't care if the Chinese government has access to that, but through WeChat, you have access to passwords and bank accounts, and maybe that's something we want to put a technological barrier or insist that that data be housed in US servers. So I actually think this is a very nuanced issue, and it really does affect every big tech company, because obviously Facebook has bank account information for all over the world. So does Apple. So do lots and lots of other companies. So I think what we're doing is just putting framework in place to deal with these things. And as investors, and Simon, I'll give you the last word here, I think we need to know that this is an issue we're going to struggle with, that global security is going to be a giant area. And just how is my data shared? Like, I've accepted that my phone number and email are not difficult for anyone to get or buy nefariously. What is going to be our standard for that with like our credit card info and our social security numbers, or even things like, my garage door opener has a password that wouldn't be difficult to figure out because I believe it is the birth year of my landlord, which is probably on Facebook. A lot of steps you'd have to connect to get that. But I actually think this is part of a much larger global privacy discussion that we need to put the government mechanisms into place. And I'd argue the tech companies need to be part of this, because we saw the congressional hearings on Facebook. And I don't think this goes to either party. I don't think your average person in Congress understands what these products are or how they work, simply based on age and experience. And I'm not saying there aren't some super hip tech older people. My wife's grandfather was on all of these apps in his late 90s and was super hip, but I don't think that's true of the average congressperson. Simon, last word here.
We're in a data world, right? There's information out there everywhere, and the nature of this conversation is, where are the vulnerabilities that hacks can take place, wherever it is, wherever the data is staying, wherever the servers are, whoever's got access to it, where are the vulnerabilities and how are we addressing those? We know from the cybersecurity industry that it's very hard for attribution if hacks take place in other countries, right? It's very hard to go into some other country and say, hey, you did this, and we're pointing the finger because we know it came from here. And then you try to have, some kind of way to take action. It's very challenging, right? So you want to put something in place. You want to have a bigger moat and stronger walls in place to protect important data. We're starting to talk about things like genomic sequencing, healthcare data, privacy data on consumers. Business information is going to the cloud. I mean, stuff like this is going in a completely new direction than when it's been protected in the past. And so this is why these conversations keep coming up, because there's trillions of dollars at stake here.
Yeah, we're living in the Batman world where people are stealing fingerprints and retinal scans and other things like that. So this is, I don't even think we're in the first inning of this discussion. And it's really easy to point out, okay, this company is housed in China and has really sensitive information. But we've seen that plenty of good old American companies are not necessarily treating our data correctly. So there is going to be something bigger. There also might be a cameo from my cat who just woke up. That being said, we're nearing the end of the show. Sam Bailey, why don't we hit our finisher? So this one I was so excited. Simon, this got 2,369 votes.
Oh my goodness.
So obviously people cared. Which of these has the biggest risk of collapse over the next decade? 47.3% said Bitcoin, 7.9% said Spotify, 20% said Tesla, 24% said Uber. Simon, I actually think they all have a chance. I actually think it's Spotify. I don't think Spotify can diversify its business fast enough to get away from the fact that the artist, middleman, then they're being the third part of the chain. I don't think there's enough money to go around. So I think with how easy it is to record an album, I can record an album on my MacBook with like a couple $100 worth of added equipment. If I'm a pro musician, a couple $1,000. I no longer need $1 million to make an album. So I feel like we're going to see massive disruption, and artists are going to say, I'm not taking 10 cents on the dollar. I want 80% here. We're seeing that in small levels with NFTs and Bandcamp and other places. I think all of these companies are risky plays, But I don't think the model works. And that is true of Spotify, of Apple Music, of anybody's music service. Apple Music doesn't have to make money. It just has to keep you sticky to Apple. I don't think Spotify with the Ringer podcast and Joe Rogan can make up the revenue for if all of a sudden Taylor Swift puts out her music on a different platform. And I think if there's anyone who's going to do it, it is probably going to be Taylor Swift.
Yeah, great points. I would vote. Spotify is probably the right answer, Dan. I mean, the question itself says collapse, which means that something really big is going to happen, really, really bad. So I vote not Tesla. I don't think Tesla collapses, but under any circumstance, they're too established out there. There's a risk of Bitcoin collapsing. I think I might vote with the majority on this, just because there's 1 million Bitcoin that's sitting in Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin wallet, right? That has been untouched since the very establishment of Bitcoin. And so if he or she or they or whoever Satoshi is were to touch that, were to sell some of those, and everybody sees that address and sees what's going on, I mean, that's kind of like that long tail nuclear bomb explodes on the price of Bitcoin. I think something like that could have some really big repercussions. So maybe I vote with the majority on this. I might vote Bitcoin just in case.
Yeah, and notice that my question was Bitcoin, not cryptocurrency. I think there is a strong future for cryptocurrency. We just don't know what that's going to look like from a regulatory point of view. Let's close out with a comment from Mike Fee, which I'm going to pick because it supports what I am saying. So the last one there, Sam, we appreciate it. Spotify is failing miserably on their attempt to capture the podcast market, overpaying and not seeing a meaningful benefit to new subs. So the problem Spotify has, and I am a giant fan of Bill Simmons and The Ringer. I listen to their media podcast. I can't believe the name of it's escaping me. I listen to Bill Simmons. I listen to Ryan Russillo, all sorts of things on that network. And I do it through Apple, even though Spotify owns them. So do they get some benefit that I'm listening? Yes, they get whatever their ad cut is on another platform. But there's no driving reason for me to switch to Spotify. And they can't pull it from Apple because maybe I would say, you know what, there's 10 other podcasts I listen to. And I probably wouldn't. I probably would be the example of person who would follow them. But it's just like listening to 7 Investing Now or the 7 Investing podcast, which I know many of you listen to this and don't watch it as a video television show, is that it's on every single platform. And if we went exclusive, someone would have to give us a lot of money to do that because you're losing out on just people who reflexively use what comes with their phone or their diehard Spotify or diehard, what's a Tidal? That's the other one that's out there. I don't think there's a lot of play there. So we appreciate so many of you watching, so many of you asking questions. If you would like to get in touch with us, it is info@7investing.com. That is questions about your memberships, questions that you'd like to join, questions about how things work on the site. If you want to interact with us, we are on Twitter. That is @7investing. Feel free to shout us out, include us in things. We did a really fun Twitter Spaces last night with me and Matt and Simon and Steve Symington impromptu last night with our good friend Max Basenko and Wolf Financial. I'm sure we'll be tweeting that out, the tape of that at some point in the next day or two. So we appreciate your support. And we will be back on Friday with at least Matt Cochran, probably Matt and surprise. No, actually a surprise appearance by Anirban Mahante. Taped that yesterday. Until then, thank you for watching. Sam Bailey, thank you for directing. For Simon Erickson, I'm Dan Kline. We'll see you tomorrow, or we'll see you Friday.